Good afternoon. I'm Matt Stanford. I'm the CEO of the Hope and Healing Center, and it's my privilege to introduce your speaker to you today. This is Dr. Daniela White. She, as you can see, an assistant clinical professor at Baylor College of Medicine. She did her clinical training at Baylor in both adult and child and adolescent psychiatry, and she oversees her outpatient clinic, which is Midtown Psychiatry and TMS Center. And TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation, if you don't know that, but that's a great thing to know about because it's a up-and-coming new treatment for particularly medication non-responsive individuals who have depression. So it's nice to have a clinic in town that can do that. She also has a diploma in psychodynamic therapy from the Houston Galveston Psychoanalytic Society, and you don't find a lot of psychiatrists that still do that, actually, and so it's always nice to have someone who does. And she's going to talk about a very hot and up-and-coming and interesting topic in mental health today, which is spirituality, but particularly in the context of resiliency with children. So thank you for being here, Dr. White.
Well, good afternoon. Yeah. And I just wanted to thank Beth Whitman for inviting me to speak. I'm really very honored to be here on a subject I'm really interested in. It's very dear to me, and I'm honored to be here today. As you all know, the talk of resilience and spirituality has been on news, if not directly or indirectly, in the last few months, right? Yeah, unfortunately, over a short period of time, we had 3 natural disasters and 2 mass shootings and a lot of victims and a lot of families affected by that. The ones that suffer the most, the survivors, are still right now piecing their lives together from the hurricanes and from the shooting. And I think they all need our prayers and thoughts right now. In light of those events, a talk of spirituality, and not only a talk, but spirituality as a source of resilience is very important. I think all of us can contribute to help those generations, young generations, to incorporate their spirituality in daily life and practice it. And I'm not sure about you, but I feel that trend for that to not be attended to as much in schools and education in general. So I was told that the audience is going to be varied, so I just wanted to get, by show of hands, are any social workers here, counselors, psychiatrists, I see Dr. Moore there, teachers, parents, okay. Any pastors, okay. So all of us have a way of interacting with children, and we can touch them in a certain way to help them evolve in a spiritual way. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me before I go in this topic. Obviously, I speak with an accent. I grew up in Romania. It was a communist country, socialist and communist. Usually, they don't like the idea of spirituality and God, and they do a lot of stuff to keep God and beliefs out of the public eye. So basically, you don't talk about it in school, you don't talk about it in social gatherings. You keep it to yourself, and they discourage attending the churches, synagogues, any places of service. So as a result, I did not get a spiritual or religious education myself in a formal way. But I had some sources, I think, that I'm very grateful for them. So my parents were physicians. They remember when they attended medical school in 60s, so 20-something years after communism arrived in the country. Students were expelled from school from just wearing the cross necklace, right? People could lose their jobs over attending churches, depending on their leadership positions. So what they did, occasionally on Easter, they would take us to a monastery in the countryside, and we would spend there a few days. And that's where my connection with God, I think, originated. And I kind of knew that they had it too, even if they weren't practicing on the daily practice in their lives, they're kind of going to church or attending services. I had a paternal grandmother, who always kept the candle. So she had this candle full of oil that she was tending to it. And I remember a big Bible and a big icon that she got from her grandfather. And she was the source of talking about God and what happens to the soul after death and all that. And also I read a lot of fairy tales. I was 18, and a lot of fairy tales had, especially in different cultures, God is involved. And those, for some reason, they were not censorship. So that's my little story. So what I would like to, for this presentation, to help with, first, that's where I'm coming from, I think, as a mental health providers. Okay, so we don't alleviate mental illness, we try to produce mental health. So taking care of the mental illness is only one step. After that, we have to work in helping those people to create mental health. So those would be the topics of today's date. What is resilience and why is it important? How does spirituality, religion contribute to resilience? And how do we help children to develop the spirituality and religious feelings? So what the resilience really means is to be able or have the ability to bounce back when things don't go as planned, when something doesn't go right, when all the conditions that we expect will go right, they don't go right. And resilience means that you're flexible to adjust to change perspectives, find a different way. If something doesn't work, not a failure, it's a feedback, I'm going to try and do something different. And the result of all this is to go back to feel good about ourselves again, or even feel ourselves again. In my daily practice, I refer to a boat when I talk with patients kind of going through different trials. And I like this comparison or analogy because I tell them our job is to keep the boat going, floating, and aim towards goal, regardless of high waves on one day or a clear sea on another day. And the picture for me, this one is a little bit more, talks to me a little bit more because it's resilience in action. So resilience doesn't mean only endurance, it means that you actually take an action to make things happen. And when I was preparing the talk, I was passing on I-10, one of the restaurant had these big signs, we cannot control the winds, but we can control the sails. So that's kind of resilience in work. All right. So let's talk about resilience, right? And how do we achieve it? So there are scholars out there, and one of them is George Valiant. And I went too far. Those are the three categories that are considered being important in helping with developing resilience. So the first one, individuals elicit help from the appropriate sources, community, social, or medical. That means that they belong to a community and they have a wide network. And it's already accepted through the research that people that have a wider network of support, they fare better in life. They have less mental illness. They are more successful in achieving their goals. Recognizing the suffering, either emotional or physical, allows you to get help. You just have to express it to this community that hopefully is able and ready to help. On the second one, each individual use conscious strategies to make the best out of negatives. Not each individual. The goal is for each individual to get to use those strategies. And some of those strategies are learned, for example, in therapy. I'm going to give you an example of one of my patients, a teenager who was in therapy at some point, and I saw her after discharge. And she was in hospital before, and she was hospitalized for recurrent suicidal ideation. And I asked her what triggered that. Well, the trigger for her was something like, I had a fight with my sister. The sister told me that I wasn't a good sister, and all I could see at school was a balcony, and in fact I could jump over it, right? So I asked her, well, what keeps you from actually doing that? And she said that the work in therapy really helped her. The therapist talked to her and said, well, once you have those thoughts, just stay with them, don't do anything. and they would go away. And she said, that's what, in fact, I'm doing. I'm just sitting with them instead of acting. I just let the thought go away. That or developing other strategies to cope with those situations. It's helpful to be learning therapy, and it's something that he can do it if they didn't learn at home. So sometimes I ask my patients to come up with 20 points of things that they can do or action that they can take to make themselves feel better so they don't think about suicide or the only way out. So in this particular patient, suicide for her was a coping skill. It was a poor coping skill. Try to help them to see other ways out. For somebody who is involved in a religious community, suicide doesn't show up as a coping skill, because most of religious people, they will see it as a sin. So when I evaluate protective factors for suicide, belonging to a religious community, having faith, protective factor in general. So another way of protecting and showing resilience is to use less conscious mechanisms that we call defenses. And some of them are more common than others, right? We can use repression, things that we forget when they are very painful. We can use suppression, but that's a little bit more conscious. I don't want to remember this. We can use denial, and that's very protective up to a point. Sometimes, for example, people that have struggled with alcohol, the denial is not really helpful. Kind of prevent them from getting help. So there are various mechanisms that we can look for in terms of building resilience. Other sources for resilience in this slide. So the social support we talked about, a loving community, a warm childhood environment, cognitive strategies, those can be acquired through therapy, either individual or group therapy. Childhood temperament. A childhood temperament is important in resilience, but we can't pick and choose that. So some children are born with a little bit more risk-seeking behavior. And with a good enough fitness with a parent, that feature of temperament can be used in a healthy way. Some of them, especially if the environment is associated with abuse or lack of supportive environment, risk-seeking behavior can develop in more self-injurious behavior later, or making choices in life that are not necessarily good. So it's a combination between the nature versus nurture, and hopefully a feature of temperament that would predispose them to be more hurt or hurt themselves. It's paired with a good parenting to avoid those type of things. Emotional intelligence, it's a word I like, and it really is the two words I like, and it's the ability of to monitor one's emotions and feelings and kind of label them and use them to guide behavior. So a lot of people, and I'm not sure people that work with younger patients, they don't know what they know what they feel, but they cannot label what they feel. And then it's difficult for them to express it and to control their behavior in relationship with their family, friends, and all kind of relationship, bosses at work. So if we go in this talk and most of the talks on religion and spirituality, the terms are overlapping a little bit and they are used interchangeable. And they are common areas that both religion and spirituality share, and there are also some differences. Spirituality most of the time is defined as a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, and involves a search for the meaning of life. Incorporates elements of religion, but it's a little bit of a broader term. You can be spiritual and not religious, but it's hard to be religious if you're not spiritual. Spirituality and religion share belief, comfort, ability to reflect, ethics, and this feeling of transcendence. Those start the spirituality, let's talk a little bit about the transcendental belief. Because there are different categories across different religions or spiritual cultures. Some people refer to it thinking about a personal dialogue with God. Other people refer to it like this sense of oneness with everything that's surrounding us. And I think those are more common in native Indian cultures. The same is this sacred consciousness in all sentient beings. And all that, in fact, transcendent means to climb, to go beyond. But having a transcendence experience is not always related to be spiritual or religious. For example, people that went into space, right, and they look back at the Earth, they have this, most of them describe this transcendent experience. It's called the overview. They shift the focus from themselves to something much bigger. I mean, apparently seeing Earth from space puts things in completely different perspective, and a lot of them return to the new approach and understanding of life and what their meaning of life is. It shifts more to a connection and kind of seeing us on this Earth so little and fragile in the middle of space as an opportunity to do better for us as a community versus an individual. So that's kind of a natural transcendence. And religion doesn't create transcendence, but builds on it. So that's important to keep in mind, that sometimes we have transcendent experiences without necessarily being in a spiritual context, but we feel spiritual. And all of us have those feelings. I know, on top of the mountains is one for me. And has this feeling of connection with everything around me. So spirituality or religion also, they have a little bit of differences between them. Spirituality is concerned more on how do I find meaning, how do I feel connected, how should I live. Religion is more focused on practices, rites, ritual that I should follow to attain those goals, or what is right or wrong, what is true or false. Well, I like this definition of spirituality because I think we all struggle, especially parents. What do I do to have a spiritual child? I don't know, struggle with that. So spirituality is like a bird. If you hold it too tightly, it chokes. Like hold it too loosely, it flies away. Fundamental to spirituality is the absence of force. So science apparently has been telling us now in the last 15 years that the seed of spirituality is inborn. And I'm not sure, I think Lisa Miller was in town and gave a speech on, and I wish I could have gone on Friday, I couldn't, but she wrote this book on the spiritual child and makes the argument that children are born wired for spirituality. And she summarized all the research that proves that. So based on that knowledge, for all parents who are concerned about not raising a spiritual kid, it's a good news. We don't have to instill it. We don't have to force it upon the children. We just have to watch it develop, nourish it, protect it, encouraging. So Lisa Miller refers to it as a birthright. So basically, you are all born with this seed of spirituality that develops at different stages in life and is different for a 6-year-old child versus an 11-year-old, 14-year-old, or adult. But she sees a development along with other parts of the body, including the brain, the muscles, social life, and everything else. Rebecca Ney is another author who writes about more the practical aspects of how to help children develop spirituality. And from her point of view, what's children's spirituality? An initial natural capacity for awareness of the sacred quality to life experiences. Or is about being attracted towards or being in relationship, responding to a call more than just me, others, to God, into a creation of a deeper sense of self. So what she says is that children can be spiritual because, like Lisa Miller, they have some characteristic that apparently makes them the perfect recipient or the receptacle to develop and flourish and engage spiritually. So children are more holistic in the way they see things. They don't analyze it. They are closer to the mystical perception of things. And if you think about the little thing like the elf on a shelf, don't pay attention to little things that would let them know that the shelf is moved from one that parents are involved in that. They just experience the experience and the magic of it. They are naturally curious and open. They do not judge, they don't get suspicion, and they have this capacity to wonder. Another way, like the Santa Claus bringing presents. They just so involved in the process. Only later, when their thinking process, we'll talk about that, goals, they might start asking questions and one together and figuring out that Santa Claus, not just Santa Claus. Children discover new things every day. So they are comfortable with everything that comes to their understanding. They are every day is a new thing that they learn. So they are exposed to this no ethic. Their children's emotional life is as strong as the intellectual life. They can't hide from feelings. So they are more likely to surrender to a force that transcends their control. Children lack knowledge about many things. Therefore, the mystery is closer to them and is not threatening. Just because they don't know about something, they don't have the fear that an adult would have for something that they don't know, doesn't know. So, and they have mysteries every day, like, where is mommy? Or how about peekaboo? It's a mystery and a search for solutions and cues all the time. Children accept that the words cannot explain everything, therefore are comfortable with what is ineffable. Parenting a spiritual child is attending to this natural spirituality that emerges at different developmental levels and is the opposite of ignoring it or stifling it. So the way that we can help is really answering those questions. And they come back with, I think the tree is thirsty today. I think the flower feels bad when you take it out of lawn. So you can communicate with them, and they are kind of help them to continue wonder and perceive the world as a oneness and full of mystery and life. And one of the lessons that a parent gives in spirituality to their kids is that unconditional love. That's closer to the love of God for us. And it's true, romantic relationships, some people want unconditional love, but a lot of times that's not the unconditional love that your parent actually gives you. So it's a good model, spirituality, just by being unconditionally in love with your child. This is Lisa Miller's take on the spiritual cognition in young children. The universe is perceived as intentional, alive, and intelligent, with the guiding sense of justice and understanding that we are part of it. Children, they do feel part of a bigger thing. They're so small. They don't see themselves separated from that entire whole. They look at parents, and the parents, for them, they are all-knowing, like God-like omniscience. Everything that they ask, the answer. Well, we know that we don't know everything, but we can answer all the questions in a way or another. And just saying, I don't know, that's a good answer. they have this belief in the afterlife or non-material realm in a children's belief system, right? I mean, think about pets, or even they lost, or even family member they lost. They always don't see death as a definite separation from them. And only later on, in adolescence, death is perceived from a scientifically based and all, but not for younger children. So they are predisposed to consider afterlife and consider the eternity of the soul. Helps in terms of developing the spirituality and the religious concepts. Children's way of thinking is different. And therefore our dialogue around spirituality will be different. So in infancy, they rely on bodily experiences. They have more of a sensory motor thought of understanding the world surrounding them. By age 2, they rely on feelings and images. By age 6, they kind of start understanding patterns and stories. And by age 11 or a little bit later, they start developing an abstract conceptual way of putting thoughts together. Given that, some people, and this is Rebecca May, they put together 6 steps. They are not in a certain order, but they are related to each other.
Spirit anagram.
What can we do to harness this natural ability of the children to become spiritual or religious, and what we should do or try to do to attend to those needs, and kind of creating an environment that speaks to them and encourage them to develop that spirituality. So it's kind of like a checklist. There are some general criteria that can be applied in any environment, home, school, or religious institution. It can be done by parents or teachers or pastors or anybody who is involved with the care of a child. So, for example, if I would say, let's talk about space. Of course, it's physical, emotional, and auditory. If we talk about a space, what kind of attributes will come to your mind for a space that will be inviting for those kids? Thoughts? Usually those places are cozy and private and small and kind of protected. They stay in circle. They have
Space
more of a close
kids.
affinity with others, their peers, the teacher or the pastor or the adult who is in the room. But there is an important thing is about the spiritual space. What can we do about creating the spiritual space, the emotional space, for them to feel comfortable pursuing spirituality? And this was Lisa Miller, who was suggesting to set your own space, walk the walk, cultivate quiet contemplation, welcome nature, use the words, all right? So it's very important for the child to see the parent doing the same thing. So child watching their parent praying or praying with them together or bringing God in daily discussions and conversation is more likely to internalize that need and go forward with it. It's okay to spend time in quiet contemplation. And remember when my kids were younger, they were so active, there was no quiet contemplation. But in the car, when I would drive them to school, as they grow older, they just have moments when they don't do anything. And initially, I felt like I have to fill that space with questions. But then I say, well, why don't we just not talk? And sometimes, well, what's on your mind? That comes, or what do you think about it, or how you feel. It might be necessary, but sometimes it's okay to just spend time in quiet contemplation. Welcome nature. Apparently there are studies that show that children who are raised in nature, they have a better understanding of the nature, and they build, or they have this connection with everything that's alive around them, and they are not insulated by electronics. I mean, the life is a continuum from their internal life to the outside. It's not fenced by screens all the time, and I think that happens, unfortunately, way too often. Let's go to, and the use of words, right? We talked about earlier how children can, I mean, if you talk to them enough, they would perceive a tree as thirsty when they need to be watered, or the dog is sad when you don't play with them. Just this communion or communication that happens between the child and surrounding beings around them, and they also start paying attention to their needs outside their own needs, self-needs. So spirituality cannot be given or even taken away. It's not an exchangeable gift. It's about a process. So it takes time, and like we talked already earlier, it parallels the child development. So if you're persistent in your parenting geared towards let the child experience and talk about God, or have those communication experiences with the surroundings, and probably by the teenagers and further up, they will be spiritual young adults. But the children, spirituality evolves like pretty much everything else through play. Okay? So a play is everything for children. A way for them to engage and interact with the world around them. Important for brain development. Allows children to develop their imagination, dexterity, cognitive and emotional strength, and is the work of children. We go to work, they go to play. That's their work. So, like I said, children who are allowed to play, and allowed to play even outside, they have an appreciation of beauty, of symmetry, of wonder. They have more questions about how everything is created, seeing their imaginary. And again, it's a lot of research done. I think Michigan University does it. Well, this will be imagination. It's another step. And nobody beats children at imagining things. We kind of lose that as we grow older. We become, I think, less able to imagine things. But children have to be encouraged to use it. They have plenty of it. All we have to do is not discourage it. And there are little things that we can do. In fact, training their imaginations for children, right? For an inquisitive brain is like gym training for the muscles. You know? So when they wake up and they have a dream, and we talk about that maybe later, the dreaming experience is the experience of transition. It's worth talking about, especially if the child brings it to you. It opens a lot of possibilities and show the child that you're open to their intimate experiences that are from another world that they don't have a grasp of, but is very real because they remember it. It's part of their memories and about what they wake up and start the day with. Reading stories, fairy tales. I mentioned them earlier. There are ways of sacred texts. The Bible has stories that you can talk to them about. Fairy tales, dreams, right? Like I told you, for me, fairy tales were very dear because I read them till I was 18. I don't know what that says about me, that I was a late bloomer, or he was fascinating to me. It was kind of a way of losing myself in an imaginary. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on the fairy tales.
Got it, fairy tale slide.
So God in Fairy Tales is a book by Jim Ware, and I stumbled upon it preparing for this talk, and confirmed to me that fairy tales really encourage the development of those spiritual needs in kids. So escaping the realm of fantasy is a legitimate exercise for human imagination. Fairy tales celebrates the basic human needs. The redeemer, the rescuer, the conquering hero are familiar figures in the world of myth and fantasy. I like that saying of Hans Christian Andersen, every man's life is a fairy tale written by God's fingers. And Hans Andersen is a Danish author. I think you know him, died in 75. And some of his works, The Little Mermaid, The Ugly Duckling, Emperor's New Clothes, they have all of them, a lot of them, have deep spiritual meaning. So The Little Mermaid, the original story, when it was picked by Disney to be developed in a movie, was considered a very, very sad story. And the Disney changed ending to make it a little bit more palatable or less threatening. But the original story's ending was, the sacrifice of one's life for the good of others, leaving behind an example to follow. And Jim Ware is in his book parallel with Jesus. And that's a beautiful talk with the children that, sometimes your love for the other person includes your sacrifice. It's a real love. So I really liked the first ending, but it was sad. That's how I read it when I was a child. Then I read it with my kids in the newer version. It was a cute story, but not as in-depth. I think you can learn something from the Disney story as well, but not the lesson that Hans Andersen, the original author, meant it. Another story, I know there are good stories too, happy stories, but another story, The Little Match Girl. I'm not sure you know it. It was popular in Romania. And again, a sad ending, but not a sad ending because the child's spirit is picked by her godmother who just passed away. Now is a talk about the afterlife and the experiences of the communion in death with the loved ones. And also can raise a lot of spiritual questions, like can a spiritual destitute inherit the spiritual kingdom? How can a sad be happy? How can the meek be ahead of the world? I didn't put on a slide, but another one was Sleeping Beauty. There is life after death. So there are all kind of messages that sometimes we don't even have to explain them to kids. But by exposing them to those fairy tales, they start getting into deeper concepts that we do encounter in spirituality or religion. Well, what's also essential in guiding kids
Relationship slide
to let them evolve in their spiritual quest, the relationship. So the relationship that we as teacher, parents, counselors, therapists have with them has to be authentic, has to allow space between individuals, and of course, safety. We all talk about safety, safe spaces nowadays, but really a relationship has to be safe, allowing to express sometimes negative feelings, right? You can have anger, frustration in the build of spirituality, and those elements have to be expressed in a safe relationship. And what can make a relationship safer than intimate relationship, right? And a lot of times, and I'm sure people that work with patients struggle with relationships. Some people have been hurt so many times that they raise walls, and then it's safer for them to not become vulnerable. It prevents them from being hurt again, but what I tell them, those walls also prevent you from being intimate with somebody. in order to develop intimacy, you have to be gradually comfortable, become vulnerable, and accept or see that the other person doesn't hurt you. I think this level of intimacy has to be rich in child-parent relationship, friendship relationship, romantic relationships, and the relationship with God is very intimate when you kind of internalize it and you have this internal dialogue. You are who you are and you become vulnerable, hopefully without being afraid or terrified of consequences of showing your vulnerability. And trust, right? Another thing that I talk to those people is like, and even when I see children and adolescents and their parents, adolescents say, well, you don't trust me. And parent comes like, well, how can I trust you if you do this and that? And so what we talk is like trust is very fluid. I mean, it grows with time and with repeated experiences of being vulnerable, being understood and not reprimanded. And sometimes in the relationship with parents and children, they kind of lose the trust, then the trust is regained. It's like a process. But the trust we have in God or in a higher power sometimes fluctuates as well. And not because of God, but because of us. I think we have to continuously work at that and kind of knowing that's there and putting ourselves in a situation where we're vulnerable and the experience of loving and acceptance. That kind of trust encourages us to not run away, but just to stick with the experience, being patient and not raising barriers, because that's the most immediate response that I see romantic relationships or even children, parents, X did this, as a result in the next relationship, I'm not going to do this. So just works against you. It doesn't work for building an intimate, trusting, loving relationship. So in order to have all that, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. So the reason I'm interested in the subject, because of what I do, we see patients that come to us at the lowest point, right? A lot of them try therapy before, try other things, nothing works. Sometimes they try medications, they go from a psychiatrist to another. But somebody who suffers from mental illness, besides feeling sad, worthless, hopeless, suicidal, also lost any resemblance of healthy life. A lot of times they isolate, they don't talk to their families, they don't go out, they don't care about exercising, sometimes they miss work. Basically, they don't care about living. That's why they think about death as an alternative. A lot of times they don't even groom themselves. They don't care. They don't take a shower. Sometimes they take a shower just because they come to see me. I didn't take a shower in 5 days, but I knew I had the appointment. Okay. They don't exercise. Sometimes they use alcohol, drugs. So, yes, the medications help get them out of the state. But after that depressed feeling is not felt, they have to learn, sometimes they never done it, or relearn, other aspects of health, of mental health, including building a community, exercising, eating healthy, feeding their spirit, making better choices, and that goes beyond medication. And that confers resilience in terms of preventing other episodes. And that's most of the work that a lot of therapists do. They send them to medication for me to kind of get them out of this acute phase of not taking care of themselves, not going to work, not doing anything suicidal. But then they have to relearn there are other things that they can do to help themselves. And usually, the good response to a medication, evaluated at 6 months, not at 3 weeks. Because being on medications helps you to make those choices that continue to improve your life. So the recovery is a long process and has to uncover and promote different interventions. And this is where spirituality and religion come into place in my mind. Because if you look at that, they promote sense of hope, meaning, strength, love, and transcendent belief, the support of community. I mean, this is something that a depressed patient doesn't have. They are hopeless, they have no meaning for life, have weak. I mean, I tell them to exercise, but they don't care about living. They're not going to go to the gym. They feel like not loved. They feel like they are a burden for the family, for everybody around them. With a spiritual feeling and religion, beliefs and rituals, I feel like a lot of them wouldn't have gotten so depressed. And after they got out of their depression, if they can develop this or go back to a spiritual community, they will be more protected for the future relapses. So one example of incorporating spiritual religion in the healing is really the substance use, and not only the substance use, alcohol and other substances. Like the 12 steps, they do get better when they accept that spiritual meaning of the program. They release control over their own addiction. They are willing to communicate with others. So the whole program is believe in a higher power, believing in a community, accept the role of the community. And I believe in it. Not everybody responds to it, but most people that achieve sobriety and they maintain it for 20, 30 years afterwards, they still attend those groups and they still practice what they've learned. Pargamet in the Psychology of Religion and Coping point out those 5 purposes for religious coping. So the spiritual part, meanings, purpose, or hope. The self-development is a positive identity. Have a model, right, in Jesus. If we work towards that model, we develop a positive sense about ourselves. More of a resolve feeling of being efficient and being able to comfort ourselves. Religion also gives the ability to share, closeness, connect us to a community, and also restraint, keep the emotions and behavior under control. If you talked about a little bit earlier about this emotional intelligence, so first you identify the feelings, you identify your emotions, but then is what do you do with them? How do you kick and scream and break doors? That's one option, but that won't help to build community. So what do you do with that anger? It's a way of channel it. There is a way of expression, and people that have the spirituality and religious understanding, they do it in a much better way. So those are the elements promoting resilience in spiritual religious practices. They are put like together because they are very similar. The belief in a loving God or a higher power, viewing God as a supportive partner in a context of a personal relationship. So most believers have this internal dialogue with God. There are the rituals, the ability to carry on and carry out spiritual and religious rituals, confession in some religion to relieve the anger and guilt and frustration. And of course, some people do that through therapy, but religion has it too. Spirituality sometimes gives a support system. The community who shares similar beliefs and engaging in supporting its individual members. So you give to the community and the community gives back to you. And of course, spirituality and religion can be an ongoing process or sometimes a sudden crisis response. Needless to say, it's more helpful if it's an ongoing process than a response to crisis. So how do we assess that in psychiatry or in what I do? And I think everybody assessing therapy or different level of working with a patient.
Hope question slide.
Those people, Hugh Gillette and more, they develop this hope questionnaires. So they look at the what the belonging to a community gives in terms of hope, strength, comfort, meaning, peace, love, and connection. Then they look at the role of organized religion, the attending services once a week or on holidays or Wednesday evening. Do they have private spirituality and practices in terms of praying every day, praying with the parents, praying with a group, praying by themselves, praying with, different practices. And effects of on medical care. Most religion may be encouraged people to go and seek medical care. There are some of them that discourage that. I was in situations in Ben Taub when, because of religious beliefs, transfusions were not accepted. So I'm talking about most of the time. But we need to know that. We really need to know what if the religion would interfere or beliefs would interfere with the medical care that somebody has to receive or not, and what we're going to do about it. Several things that they can affect most of the time positively what I deal with, right? So in MDD, in major depressive disorder, sometimes beliefs can increase vulnerability, and sometimes they help with better recovery. In what way could increase the vulnerability? Depressed patients are already predisposed to the sense of guilt. So sometimes that guilt can be exacerbated. Depends on the connection and depends on the relationship that the patient has with the pastor. A lot of times when people feel like, I betrayed my church, I'm not worth it, I did this and that, they do not speak to somebody in the church to help them get over that and kind of have that forgiving and understanding. In substance use disorder, has a huge protective role, lower the risk of misuse. In bipolar disorder, when somebody starts having intense preoccupation with subjects, religious subjects, spiritual, could be a sign of relapse into a manic episode. So that can be different than most of the other presentations. It's the only time when the talk of God and connection and hearing the messages, especially when it's not a sustained religious practice, can raise the question, is this a manic episode? In psychosis, on the other hand, religion can provide a sense of self and guidelines for behavior. So we talk about schizophrenia, not necessarily the organized people with schizophrenia, but chronic schizophrenics, they find relief in those religious practices. In OCD, sometimes some presentations revolve around with practicing. I'm not good enough. They are more black and white, and they have difficulties accepting they didn't do things right. That needs to be addressed as well. So it's not known if really the spirituality religion aggravates OCD, but I do, because OCD is a disorder that is involved in having mental obsessions and then physical compulsions, right? And the obsessions can switch. Some people have repeated touching, some people have preoccupation with sacred verses, and what does it mean for them, and how people obey it or not obey it, so they can make a whole central of this disease around the religious text. So it's a word of caution when we talk about that, because everything that we talked about being supportive can be turned around and have a negative impact on healing, like God has abandoned us.
What if somebody is prevented to attend rituals because of a sin? That has a negative impact. What if the supportive system is not accepting, so the individual feels rejected and chooses not to participate? So when we talk about systems, we have to evaluate in what way, and encourage the positive way of looking at spirituality and religion, and not of those negative things that can transpire from it. I think most of you are familiar with the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And Harold Kushner, I'm not sure, I know he's a rabbi, and his son was suffering from a genetic disorder, and they raised him knowing that he's going to die very early. So died, I think, when he was 14 or 15, but while he was having the son dying gradually, he was also serving his community. And I think he has some words of wisdom for us, and in trying to avoid a trap, God has abandoned us. So he was saying we can ask God to change the laws of nature for us. So he was saying the prayer that most people do, I don't want to die. So a lot of prayers about saving yourself, close ones, and for health and recovery. And his point is God cannot help everybody. So maybe it's a different way of praying than just ask God to undo some of the natural law. We can pray to do someone else's harm. Most likely God won't do that. And also, she said, maybe it's not wise to ask God to do something that is in our power to do, spare us from doing our chores. Yeah, we can pray to God for finding a parking spot in the morning, or for passing, I don't know what, licensing exam. But doesn't mean that if we don't have a parking spot in the morning, God loves us less. Doesn't mean that God didn't love us because we didn't pass our exam or licensing things. So we have to be mindful about prayers and what we ask God to intervene. So he was suggesting, and a lot of them, I think, a lot of those thinkers, prayer is to connect you with other people. Most of the prayer expresses gratitude, right, of being alive, wake up in the morning, having another day, hoping for a good day tomorrow, praying for that when you go back to the winter. We pray to be in touch with God. There are a lot of situations in our modern world that would make us feel that we lose connection and He forgot about us. So we also pray for the strength to endure and fight the trials that come to us. So I think what we pray for is probably resilience, just the ability to find the strength that we are gifted with, be able to go through a process that is negative, like the boat on the waves that we started with.